Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our National PFAS Leadership Summit. We are so delighted that so many of you have taken the time to be here with us, with the administrator and deputy administrator in this tremendously important topic that we're going to be focusing on here. So I want to thank all the states. There are nearly 40 states who've made the journey to be here with us. The tribes who are here, all of our federal partners, NGO organizations, regulated water utilities, just a breadth of folks who have equities in this very important issue on PFAS. And I also in particular want to thank all of you who are watching on the live stream. Your role is very important on these issues. We're very interested in your perspectives. And I'll want to emphasize that today's event and the event we'll have tomorrow with the federal and state co-regulators is the first step in a process to gather input, thoughts, perspectives on PFAS compounds and to work together to address these challenges. We're going to be traveling to communities across the country after the summit to hear directly from communities, from residents, from local elected officials to hear perspectives on these challenges. And so we look forward to engaging directly with all of you as well. Today, our meeting objectives are to share the broadest range of perspectives on PFAS compounds regarding both the current and the future management efforts that are needed for these compounds, to inform the substance of our effort at EPA to prepare a PFAS national management plan, and to equip all of us, all of the participants, to work together in addressing these challenges. And we are so fortunate here today to be joined by Administrator Scott Pruitt. Scott Pruitt was confirmed as the 14th administrator of the EPA in February of last year. And since the administrator's coming to EPA, he has been clear that investing in America's infrastructure, in focusing on public health protection through protecting drinking water, cleanup of contaminated sites, were all going to be top priorities of his Back to Basics agenda here at EPA. And this leadership summit really embodies those priorities. You know, this is really about protection of public health, and we know that there are important issues around contaminated sites and drinking water as well. That's really the heart of what we're going to be talking about here. And I have to say, from the first time that I met the administrator over a year ago, and we talked about drinking water, he said, well, we're going to be working on lead, we're going to be working on infrastructure investment, we're going to be working on PFAS compounds from the first day. And that is exactly what we're doing here in the Office of Water and in the drinking water program, focusing on those key issues. And I just want to express my gratitude to the administrator for his commitment and his leadership on these issues. I think many of you know that the administrator hails from, most recently from the state of Oklahoma, where he was the Attorney General. Also managed and led a baseball team in the state of Oklahoma, and has provided so much leadership on these issues around drinking water, PFAS, lead, and other issues. And I'm tremendously grateful for his presence here, and I would request that y'all join me in welcoming Administrator Scott Pruitt.
Peter, thank you for the very kind introduction. And let me say first and foremost, the leadership that Peter has shown, Dave Ross with our Office of Water as well, it's been a lot of investment of time, resources, leadership to put this event on. This is a great sight to see as I look across the room. And this is something we've been talking about for some time. So I really appreciate, Peter, your leadership, Dave, your leadership as well. Looking forward to the discussion over the next day and a half. And that's really, as I begin our discussion today, I want to really recognize how important and consequential this day is. We, as an agency, are kicking off the discussion with respect to national leadership on PFAS, and we're here to provide critical national leadership as well as to take action. And as Peter indicated, with more than 200 people in the room from across the country, it's clear that this issue is a national priority. And it's something that we as an agency look forward to contributing answers toward and working with our federal partners and state partners to achieve good outcomes. As Peter indicated, we have more than 35 states in attendance today. We have more than 20 agencies, federal agencies. We have 3 tribes in attendance as well, congressional staff, as well as dozens of associations, industry groups, and NGOs. So clearly, this is a national priority that we need to focus upon as a country. Just a little background on PFAS. PFAS are a group of man-made chemicals, as you know, that have been widely used since the 1940s. Because of their stain-resistant, waterproof, and nonstick properties, they've been used and deployed quite aggressively. They've helped fight fires, obviously. They've saved lives. They've been used in products that we use every single day. But as we've used those chemicals over the course of many, many decades, there are concerns across the country about these chemicals because of their persistence, their durability, getting into the environment and impacting communities in an adverse way. That's the reason we're here today. So these kind of events, I think, are very important to raise awareness. They're very important to provide dialogue so we can hear from our state and federal partners. But what I want to emphasize to you from the very beginning is that we as an agency, the EPA, intends to take action on certain steps post this meeting that I think are very important. The first that I'd like to mention to you is that we will take the next step under the Safe Drinking Water Act process to evaluate the need of a maximum contaminant level for PFOA and PFAS. It's something that's been talked about for a number of years. The process needs to begin. The determination of an MCL is something that we will begin in earnest post this meeting, and I look forward to your contribution to that very important issue through the next day and a half. The second thing that I'll share with you is we're currently developing groundwater cleanup recommendations for PFOA and PFAS at contaminated sites across the country, and we'll complete this task by the fall of this year. Thirdly, another action steps that we're going to be taking post this meeting is we're starting the necessary steps to consider establishing liability under CERCLA, either Section 107 or Section 102, to declare PFAS, PFOA as a hazardous substance. That will contribute to steps we can take to get accountability under our CERCLA statute. And we're also going to take action in close collaboration with our federal and state partners to develop toxicity values for Gen X and PFAS. That's actually ongoing. I was in Cincinnati about a month ago, and the Cincinnati lab is leading that effort, and that should be done by the summer of this year. So 4 key critical steps, from MCL to CERCLA to these toxicity tests or values being set, are constructive steps that we can take as an agency post the meetings here today. As we take these steps, cooperative federalism has been at the heart of everything we've done here at the agency. And with 30-plus states in attendance today, 3 tribes, and partners across the country, we know that it's important that you can't lead unless you listen. And so I want to make sure that we hear from you about steps we can take to equip you to inform your decisions at the state level. Concerned citizens, local governments, states across the country are very focused upon acting. We have people from community groups here as well that I know are very concerned about this. We want to hear from all of you as we take the next steps. The summit objectives, as Peter has indicated, we want to set priorities for identifying and solving challenges with PFAS in your communities. That is something that we intend to do. Many of you here today are already on the ground addressing PFAS. We want to learn from you in that regard. And this summit and the upcoming engagement with the communities, as Peter indicated, is so important. I think Region 1, Alex is going to be leading that sometime in late June, June 25th, as I recall. And then shortly thereafter, we'll have other regions across the country that will be working with you to implement that which is talked about over the next day and a half. So those summit objectives are very important in cooperation with the states and our local partners. The post-summit actions, I've mentioned New Hampshire with respect to the leadership being shown there, Michigan as well, and the regions working with those respective states. We will take the information we've gleaned from both the summit today and those community visits over the next month and a half to draft a national, as Peter indicated, national PFAS management plan, and that will be done by the fall of this year. So in close, I would say to you that this is an historical day. It's an historical day because we are coming together as state and federal partners, local communities recognizing that this should be and must be a national priority, and that we are going to be taking concrete steps as an agency to address that along with you at the state and local level. So I'm looking forward to the outcomes. I hope you have a wonderful next day and a half, a very collaborative, a very consequential, I think very much focused on dialogue and results. And I will work with you to make sure that we take action and not just raise awareness over these next coming months. Thanks so much for being here. Craig, I look forward to your comments. And Peter, congratulations again for putting this on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Administrator. And to recognize the tremendously important role of the states here in this activity and the Leadership Summit and also our efforts going forward. We also want to have some remarks from Director Craig Butler from the State of Ohio, Director of Ohio EPA. Back in 2014, Director Butler was appointed by the governor as Director of Ohio EPA. He's been a public servant for more than 24 years. He previously served as District Chief of both Ohio EPA's Central District and the Southeast District Office. Graduated from Mansfield University in Pennsylvania with a BA in Geography and Environmental Science. Also graduated from Ohio University with a Master's in Environmental Science. Director Butler serves as the serves on the ECOS Executive Committee and is co-chair of the ECOS Water Committee. And I will say that I've had the opportunity to work through a number of emergency situations with Director Butler, and always in each of those experiences shown great poise and the same kind of focus that he brings to his running activities. He mentioned he's going to be competing in an ultra marathon, a 100-mile race in 2 weeks, you said? 2 weeks. All right. Please welcome Director Butler.
Good morning. So thank you, Administrator Pruitt, for your leadership in calling for this National Leadership Summit. States agree strongly that U.S. EPA must show leadership on the issue and work closely with states to quickly and confidently find elusive answers about these perfluorinated compounds as the risk they pose to the environment and the public. Rest assured that the states are here today, excuse me, in great numbers, and we're in it for the long haul. As Peter mentioned in his introduction of me, I am the Director of Ohio EPA, and I am pleased to present some brief introductory remarks on behalf of my state and on behalf of ECOS, the Environmental Council of States, which represents many other states impacted by these substances. While states may vary on specific issues to be discussed today, and some are farther along than others, we're commonly united in knowing that these substances are pervasive and persistent in the environment and pose a danger to our citizens. Certainly, Ohio is embroiled in this issue, as many other sister states are, including New York, New Jersey, North Carolina, California, Colorado, Vermont, New Hampshire, Michigan, to name a few. Many of them are here today. In fact, at least 20 states have detected these PFAS compounds in drinking water and groundwater. And those and many other states are working on how to manage contaminated soils or surface waters. It's noteworthy and indicative of the level of interest and concern for the issue that we have 38 states represented here today, nearly half of whom are represented by one of my fellow state directors or their deputy. And to my fellow states, welcome and thank you. As far back as 2004, Ohio and West Virginia were faced with a very similar issue from a chemical release from the DuPont Washington Works plant called C8, or ammonium perfluorooctanate. These chemicals are similar to PFAS, the Per and Polyfluoroalkyl compounds we're now discussing. C8, like these PFAS compounds, are present very difficult challenges, and they're very pervasive and persistent in the environment. They can or may cause health impacts at very low levels, and are compounds used in a vast array of products for consumer use. Certainly, we face many day-to-day challenges in our jobs. However, when faced with a challenge this broad and impactful, it's imperative that we use a different approach to quickly develop the science needed to inform and communicate to the public and policymakers about risk and risk mitigation. Administrator Pruitt, I'm confident that your commitment to the effort and state's engagement, we will again be successful. Administrator, you touched on cooperative federalism, and I would like to as well, because I see a parallel on this topic. We at ECOS and US EPA, frankly, have made significant progress in the last year about taking your vision and restoring the balance between the states and the federal EPA. It's largely focused on how we'll work together and how we'll organize and complete our work. And as proud as we should be about this work to date, I submit that I can find no other issue than this one, where we can put the cooperative federalism model into practice in a powerful and meaningful way. To me, this is where the cooperative federalism rubber meets the state and federal relationship road. This is where states and US EPA honor our respective responsibilities to each other and to our citizens. Here's where we take advantage of our special competencies we each have and work together to solve the problem as soon as possible or practicable. Without partisanship or politics, with a commitment to collaborate, we must identify our strengths, our roles, and quickly get down to the business of protecting the environment and the public from the risks these substances present. There is no doubt in my mind that the results we achieved so far to bring back true cooperative federalism will propel us to develop quicker and better solutions on this issue. I expect, and there will be much needed discussions over the next 2 days about where PFAS substances are coming from and what can be done to treat them or remove them from the environment. Assuredly, there will and needs to be discussion and debate about what levels of these substances are safe in drinking water, soils, and surface water, and how can and should these substances be regulated to assist with cleanup and remediation of areas that have historical contamination and that will remain a present and future threat. Equally important, as I'm sure you would all agree, is the need to identify what we do not know. Where are the gaps in our knowledge? And how are we going to build a state and federal framework to answer those questions? ECOS yesterday released a letter, and we hope it will spur discussion for today and tomorrow. And while I'll leave you all to read it at your leisure in its entirety, I'll make a few of the main points here today. As the administrator mentioned, maximum contaminant level or not a maximum contaminant level. In 2016, EPA established a lifetime health advisory of 70 parts per trillion for concentrations of PFOA, PFAS in drinking water. There is no MCL yet defined under the Safe Drinking Water Act, but practically many in the public and states are using that LHA as an MCL. In the absence of further guidance, states have taken a different approach to react to public concern. The resulting variation in PFOA, PFAS standards across the state creates a potential for confusion and complicates efforts to communicate health risk. And while not universal, several states have asked EPA to address these problems by promulgating an MCL for PFOA and PFAS. However, other states are concerned that regulation could divert resources from other drinking water issues and pose unwarranted cost on water systems. We must discuss this issue. We must decide if the HAL is sufficient and protective, and should this work be a priority, or are there other challenges we face that are more pressing? States are also struggling to protect drinking water sources from sites historically contaminated by these substances. At present, federal and state governments lack clear authority to order investigations and cleanup at such sites, and federal entities like the Department of Defense, they lack clear authority to incur remedial costs. ECOS members urge EPA to work with the states to find a way to close these gaps and enable remedial activity. On a successful note, in Ohio, we have worked with the Ohio National Guard to complete on- and off-site testing with our local health department partners to determine if these substances are present and will impact public or private water supplies. Thankfully, we had a few issues to manage, and we were able to connect the fume home necessary to public water. Alternatively, we face a different story where a large military base has off-site low levels of PFAS contamination present down gradient sentinel wells, providing water to a major nearby community. Absent the regulatory driver and a cleanup standard, we've been frustrated and unable to convince the base to move with our necessary sense of urgency to address this looming problem. We're continuing to work on having the base take treatment and abatement measures now rather than triggering the need for wide-scale treatment and supplying residents with an alternative source of water. But frankly, without a driver and a standard, we're not meeting with success. And this is not a unique story amongst our sister states. Absent major adjustments in posture, we'll face these issues time and time again. States need the tools to drive remediation as well as provide appropriate guidance about when remediation is complete. There are thousands of PFAS compounds besides PFOA and PFAS, and either currently being used in commercial products or have been used in the past. For many of these products, the primary exposure route is likely to be through manufactured or used products, not secondary environment contamination. EPA's strategy must reflect these realities as well. Currently, state regulators lack basic information about the manufacture, use, and purchase of many PFAS, let alone their chemical characteristics and potential hazards. EPA should consider using its authority under Section 8 of TSCA to gather relevant information about manufacturers. Most importantly, manufacturers should provide information about locations of PFAS manufacturing facilities and their primary uses and purchases and products. It would help states identify areas and prioritize areas where citizens may have been exposed to unusual levels of PFAS. Again, the ECOS letter details these and other questions in more detail, and we hope that it will spur conversation for today. So in conclusion, I'll set a few final thoughts, and let me conclude with a few observations and then a proposal. My first observation is that this issue to me falls into a category of a problem that I call the science and information paradox. It is this paradox of having few answers and needing time to develop the true science to give good information to the public immediately, while at the same time the public continues to demand guidance. It's very challenging to navigate, but it's where we find ourselves on this issue. Here we have an identified risk to the environment and to the public. The risk has a very high unknown quotient. We don't know much about the science, and we have few answers about the level of risk posed. Yet the public, through social media and the internet, have heard of the issue and understandably have many, many questions about how to protect their family. It's the new environment that we live in, but we must adapt and meet that challenge. How are we to balance these expectations of the public with the limitations we have? The answer to me is that we must be very open and transparent about what we know, and more importantly, about what we do not. We must deliberately also accelerate the timeline we are using to find answers. Do not compromise the science, but how can we prioritize and complete our work and share it even if we don't have all of the answers? It is my experience the public will be somewhat patient about us not having all of the answers immediately, as long as they're convinced of three things: that we're competent and empathetic, that we're convincing them that we're working hard to solve the problem, and that we're providing them the best, most up-to-date advice possible on how to protect their family. My second observation is that the states depend on EPA ORD, Office of Research and Development, in their efforts to understand the impacts of PFAS and other contamination on human health and the environment. In most cases, states do not have the world-class scientists or facilities to tackle the issues like PFAS and must rely on US EPA for assistance. Administrator, I know you recently have toured the Cincinnati Water Lab, and I expect you've come to appreciate both the intrinsic and practical value of the Office of Research and Development with solving these complex environmental problems. I'm very fortunate that I have this facility in my backyard, and I often rely on their expertise to help solve practical water problems. I even call Peter at 2 o'clock in the morning on occasion. These key national laboratories are extraordinary. They will be also key in finding solutions on the PFAS issue, as well as many other emerging and unknown contaminants yet to challenge us. And finally, in the spirit of cooperative federalism, states hope today that we'll be starting a point of coordination and collaboration between US EPA, the states, and our other stakeholders on the issue. And as such, we offer a proposal for your consideration, which is US EPA to form a formal working group to bring the facilitate interagency and intergovernmental collaboration. The group could include federal facilities such as FDA, ATSDR, National Institute of Health and Sciences, National Toxicology Program, Department of Defense, and others, and the working group would also include state representatives. ECOS members propose that the work with states to assemble such a group as soon as possible, to arrange our work, and then have a meeting that coincides with our fall ECOS meeting, August 28th and 30th. And lastly, Administrator, let me offer a job well done for asking Dr. Gravatt to lead your PFAS team. It gives me great comfort to know that because I've worked with Peter since shortly after 2014 in our Toledo water crisis, no matter the issue, Peter has always dropped whatever he has been working on to help Ohio. I'm certain he does this to other states, although I like to think that we're his favorite. And for that, I and other states thank him and you and welcome him on your leadership team as we work together to solve the issue. And for that, thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Butler. Thank you again, Administrator, for your leadership on this tremendously important issue. So we're going to transition here to our first panel, where we're going to provide an overview of the historic and current uses of PFAS, as well as the perspective of our TSCA program. And Director Butler made mention of TSCA and the important role of TSCA on this. And so we're going to have two speakers, Jessica Bowman with ACC, and also Jeff Morris with the TSCA program. So I'll invite you two to come up as I introduce both Jessica and Jeff. Since 2011, Jessica has served as Senior Director of the Global Fluorochemistry at the American Chemistry Council. Sorry, there's steps over there as well. Before joining the ACC, Ms. Bowman worked for the Airports Council International North America as the Senior Director of Environmental Affairs. She was previously legal counsel for ACC's Chlorine Division, and she earned her bachelor's degrees in geoenvironmental engineering from Penn State and a Juris Doctorate degree from the University of Maryland. And then our second speaker is going to be Jeff Morris, and he is the Director of the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics, which implements our TSCA legislation, which regulates industrial chemicals. Jeff is also responsible for administering the Pollution Prevention Act and other important activities through OPPT. He's worked as a federal servant for over 25 years. In his career, he's held a number of positions across the agency, and I've had the pleasure of working with him from the Office of Research and Development, Office of Pesticides Program, and other roles, including the National Program Director for Nanotechnology Research. And Jeff has a PhD in Science and Technology Studies from Virginia Tech and has published research on risk and environmental policies. We're going to start with Jessica, and thank you so much. Please join me in welcoming Jessica Bowman.
Great. Well, first, I'd just like to thank Administrator Pruitt and Peter and his entire team for organizing this event and providing leadership to help the states manage the issues that they're facing in communities around the country. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to being involved in the discussions coming out of this event. So if you've spent any time looking into this chemistry, you likely quickly realized how complicated the class of Per and Polyfluoroalkyl Substances, or PFAS, is. So Peter asked me to help provide a better understanding of this very broad and diverse family of chemistry. So I'm going to spend a few minutes explaining the PFAS that have been manufactured and used historically. I'm also going to discuss the actions that our industry has taken working with EPA and other regulators over the last couple decades to improve our products and our processes, while also meeting the performance needs of the many industries and applications that rely on PFAS chemistry. And then finally, I'll share some thoughts about how we hope to continue to be an active and constructive stakeholder in the PFAS dialogue going forward. So historically, industry and downstream users generally used or relied on long-chain PFAS. And we define long-chain as EPA does and as OECD does. And at the end of my slides, there's a link to OECD that I refer you to. Because of the nature of the historic manufacturing processes, many of the products actually contained a range of chain lengths and various process impurities, which you now see at contamination sites. As more toxicity and environmental data was developed, industry started working with EPA in the early 2000s to phase out those long-chain substances, including virtually eliminating facility emissions and long-chain product content. Those long chains are no longer produced in the US, Europe, or Japan. And these efforts have led to substantial declines in the blood levels of PFOA and PFOS in the general US population. Notably, however, production does continue in places like China, and imported products treated with long chains continue to make their way to the US and will continue to do so in the absence of regulation. Critical to phasing out those long-chain legacy compounds was industry's innovation in developing the new PFAS that are manufactured and used today. Today's PFAS are generally short chains, and they have significantly improved hazard profiles compared to the legacy products. There have also been substantial advances in the processes by which today's PFAS are manufactured and supporting stewardship efforts leading to minimized emissions. Today's PFAS are critical and continue to enable a myriad of applications that are vital to the US and the global economy. So it's important to understand that the family of PFAS chemistry is very broad and diverse. It includes many, many substances that vary in their chemical structure, in their physical properties, their hazard profiles, and their uses. And importantly, only a smaller subset of the many substances that fall within this family of chemistry have an actual commercial use. So I'm going to describe this chemistry from the standpoint of PFAS product category so you understand why this chemistry is manufactured and used and how those products relate to the specific substances that you're finding in the environment. So the major PFAS product categories are fluoropolymers, fluororepellents, and fluorosurfactants. I'll discuss those in more detail on the next slide, but I did include a few visuals here of the types of applications that rely on these products. So for example, fluoropolymers are critical to many medical devices and many automotive, aerospace, and electronics applications. Fluororepellents are used in medical garments and first responder gear and provide stain and oil repellent properties for carpet, textiles, and paper. Fluorosurfactants are used in certain firefighting substances and paints and coatings. The legacy PFAS were either based on long chains or a long chain PFAS was used in its manufacturing. So for some fluoropolymers, a polymerization aid is needed to manufacture them. So historically, a long chain PFAS, like a soda PFOA, was used as that polymerization aid. Producers have now stopped using those long chain polymerization aids and developed alternatives. The fluoropolymers themselves haven't fundamentally changed, and they continue to provide critical performance properties. For fluororepellents and fluorosurfactants, those products themselves were historically based on long chains. So some of those products were then sources of substances like PFOA or PFOS, generally as a manufacturing impurity or a degradation product. So industry has now moved to repellent and surfactant properties that are based on short chains that cannot degrade to those long chain substances. So now let's look at the PFAS that are manufactured today. So as I said, a fluoropolymer that was manufactured 15 years ago really isn't that much different than one that's produced today. So these are very high molecular weight polymers that are neither bioavailable nor water soluble, and they're extremely inert. So therefore, they don't present any significant risk. They have properties that are critical to many applications: durability, stability, inertness, unique electrical properties. And these are properties that make fluoropolymers critical to medical devices, fuel-efficient aircraft and cars, and the manufacturing of semiconductors, amongst many others. Today's fluoropolymers, for those that require a polymerization aid, industry has moved to a variety of solutions, all of which are based on short chains. For the fluororepellents and surfactants, industry has transitioned from long chain products to short chain products. These short chain based products cannot break down to long chains like PFOA. Like fluoropolymers, fluororepellents are also polymeric products that, again, do not present toxicity concerns themselves. These polymers are used in textiles, carpeting, and paper to provide oil repellency and stain resistance. Fluorosurfactants provide important properties that are relied on in Class B firefighting foams to fight high hazard solvent and petroleum fires, and they provide paints and coatings with unique benefits. Overall, the PFAS that are manufactured or used today have undergone rigorous regulatory scrutiny, including substantial upfront data requirements. Data has been developed on acute and chronic toxicity, reproductive and developmental toxicity, and long-term environmental fate. Regulators have worked to make sure these newer products meet the highest standards to protect public health and the environment. I think Jeff will be discussing that in more detail. Industry has also improved its manufacturing processes. So the products produced today are more precise. So you aren't seeing significant variation in chain length within the final products. Industry's also improved its manufacturing processes, so the product, of course, we also want to prevent today's PFAS from getting into the environment. So industry is implementing many of the practices and technologies that we learned through the phase out of the legacy PFAS to minimize our own facility emissions. So we're working with downstream users to help, minimize emissions from those users' facilities. So we have guidance documents now available for both the textile and the Class B firefighting foam industries. And those stand to have a real impact on environmental emissions. So for example, past practice was to use those firefighting foams in training exercises and when calibrating equipment. And these practices likely contributed significantly to the contamination that you're seeing today. Today's best practice is to only use these foams when you need them, and when you do use them, contain them, treat them, and properly dispose of them. And finally, contrary to what we commonly hear, there are commercial remediation options available for managing emissions of today's short chain products, and these are being demonstrated, and knowledge about those techniques is increasing. So finally, the last thing I want to discuss is some of the ongoing industry efforts on PFAS and how we hope we can be a constructive stakeholder in the PFAS dialogue going forward. So first, we're contributing to the overall scientific understanding of PFAS chemistry. We know there's an interest in better understanding the hazard profiles and exposure sources of various PFAS. Our industry is contributing to characterizing that information, including distinguishing the hazard profiles of various PFAS. We're contributing to product stewardship efforts by developing and sharing best practices and other programs to support our downstream users and customers to help minimize environmental emissions. Education and outreach are also critical to addressing this issue. We think it's important for the public and all stakeholders to understand the risks and benefits of different PFAS chemistries. We look forward to continuing our good work in these areas and living up to our obligations as proper product stewards. Finally, we support a risk-based approach to regulating PFAS that's based on the best available science. Such an approach should recognize the differences in various PFAS chemistries and that not all PFAS require risk-based regulation. An approach should prioritize those PFAS of highest concern and interest for further research and the development of guidance and standards. We also support EPA's consideration of sound science and risk-based cleanup levels and MCLs under the Safe Drinking Water Act for PFOS, PFOA, and other legacy PFAS. We also support finalizing a significant new use rule for addressing imports of legacy PFAS. And finally, we think it's important for there to be early and meaningful stakeholder engagement and transparency, including the need for NAS independent third-party peer review. So thanks for the opportunity to be here with you today. My contact details are here on the slide, and ACC looks forward to being a resource to all of you. We're committed to and supportive of EPA's efforts and stand ready to be a constructive and fully engaged partner. Thank you.
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you. Now, as Jessica described, PFAS play an important role in our economy. Indeed, those of us who rely on electronic devices with a computer chip, and I'd venture to guess that's all of us, owe the performance characteristics of those devices, in part at least, to the role that PFAS play in the semiconductor industry. But that being said, even for chemical substances that play critical roles in our national economy and our societal well-being, when those chemical substances are found where we don't want them to be, such as in our food and water, we have a responsibility to understand the issue and, if necessary, take action. And so a good place, I think, for us to start today is with the one federal statutory framework that addresses industrial chemicals, both pre-market as well as once they enter commerce. And that's the Toxic Substance Control Act, or TSCA, that my office administers. And I'd like to start with pre-market review. Now, in the last 12 years, we have seen about 900 PFAS substances enter our new chemicals program. And what that means is that prior to introduction of a new chemical substance into commerce, manufacturers have the responsibility to come to EPA with a notification of desire to commercialize. And it's my office's job to, within 90 days, review that notice using a risk-based standard, using available data as well as the tools we have in our office to look at chemical structure, physical chemical properties, to make an affirmative determination now under amended TSCA to determine whether that substance can be safely introduced into commerce. Now, many of the 900 substances, almost all of them actually, that came in to the agency came before the significant amendments to TSCA, which I'll talk about. But that being said, although 900 seems like a large number, about 1,000 new chemical substances enter the agency through my program every year. So within that same period, about 12,000 chemical substances came to the agency. So the PFAS portion represents somewhere between 7 and 8%, which is not an unusual amount for a whole entire class of chemical substances. I think an example of where the new chemicals program plays an important value in understanding PFAS is with the Gen X case. So Gen X was a new PFAS that came to the agency in 2009. EPA evaluated it and believed that while it could be allowed into commerce with restrictions safely, there was a requirement that data be generated to support its use in commerce. Those data were generated, and the EPA has been evaluating those data, and as was mentioned by the administrator, is in the process now of updating the risk evaluation for Gen X. So this is a case where the new chemicals program played an important role in acquiring data related to PFAS. And the next slide gets into the data landscape for PFAS substances. So under the TSCA program, as this chart illustrates, we've received data across the spectrum of environmental health and safety disciplines that are needed to adequately evaluate a chemical substance. Now, this chart tells us a couple things. One, it tells us these pie slices aren't of equal size, meaning that there are areas where we have more data and less data related to PFAS substances. So there's clearly more work that needs to be done. I'll also point out, what's not on the slide, is this pie represents about 900 or so studies for around 200 chemical substances. So it doesn't represent all of those 900 PFAS substances that we saw through the new chemicals program or all of those in commerce, but it represents a good starting point for evaluating PFAS. And so we're not starting at a blank sheet of paper here. We have some data on a number of chemical substances, but it also points out to the importance, as mentioned before, of the work being done by our Office of Research and Development and other partners to understand the PFAS field, to look at where we need data to understand how various classes of substances behave in the environment. So again, a starting point. But this starting point then takes us to the other portion of the program that my office administers, and that's existing chemical substances. So once those 900 substances were reviewed by the agency, and for some subset of those 900, companies decided to go ahead and commercialize the substances. Those then were put on the TSCA chemical inventory and became existing chemical substances. Next slide, please. Now, under the Lautenberg Act amendments to TSCA, a framework was put up, established for evaluating existing substances that didn't exist before. Prior to the 2016 amendments to TSCA, while there was always the responsibility, or there was always the authority of the agency to review existing chemicals. There wasn't a mandate, a program to do it. Now there is. And what this diagram lays out is the framework for doing that. And basically, you can just look at this in three parts. On the left-hand side, there's a prioritization step. What that means is the agency is required to go through the entire chemical space of tens of thousands of chemicals in commerce and identify those that are either a low or a high priority for evaluation. So that part of the space includes the PFAS substances that are in commerce. Now, during that period, there's at least 9 months, no more than 12 months, to go through and get public comment on the agency's prioritization recommendations. Should a chemical substance or a class of chemical substances be identified as a high priority for evaluation, the agency has 3 to 3.5 years to conduct that evaluation. And then finally, should that evaluation identify unreasonable risks, the agency has a requirement to move forward within 2 to 4 years to take action to address those unreasonable risks. Now, this diagram, I think, points out two important things for PFAS. First of all, we need to be able to bring into the evaluation space, even into the prioritization space, chemicals or classes of chemicals that are ready for evaluation. Because once that 3-year clock starts, there's no turning back, and we need to complete that evaluation within 3 years. That means we need to have the information available to us to do a scientifically robust determination that will support a risk determination at the end of those 3 and 3.5 years. So you can see where the need to understand the PFAS field, to understand what information is needed, is important if you're going to discuss PFAS within the TSCA existing chemicals construct. The other thing I think this diagram points out on the left side regarding prioritization is that when the agency proposes that a chemical substance or a class of substances is a priority for risk evaluation, there's up to a year to have public dialogue on whether the chemical or the class as a whole is indeed a high priority and how that evaluation ought to be carried forward. Now, within that 9 to 12 months, there's built into the statute half a year, 180 days of public comment periods. But it doesn't stop there. Anytime during that process, there can be dialogue, and indeed, should a chemical or a class of chemicals be identified as a priority, even within that 3 years, there are many opportunities for public dialogue. So I think the point here is that the TSCA amendments provide a framework now for looking at the chemical space, including PFAS, and identifying when a chemical, a class of chemicals, has adequate data to support an evaluation, and if indeed there are concerns, is ready to be brought in that space, and there's adequate dialogue and opportunity to begin that discourse. And then finally, in addition, with the next slide, while I'll leave you with these resources, there's a couple of other thoughts that I wanted to leave us with. First of all, it seems clear from the procedures and the time frames that TSCA prescribes for existing chemicals that the federal chemicals regulatory regime can play an important role, but not a complete role, particularly in the very near term, in addressing the issues that we're going to talk about over the next day and a half. Clearly, there are things that need to be done while information is gathered, and we look at the PFAS space. That being said, the strengthened and amended TSCA, with its requirements for evaluation and, if necessary, action, provide a transparent forum for engagement as we, local, state, federal regulators, industry, and other stakeholders, evaluate the space, look at ways that we can address in ways that are both responsive and responsible to address the questions that the public is asking regarding PFAS substances. So we look forward to working with you, to playing a leadership role in understanding how our statutory requirements, and in my case TSCA, can help enable us to move forward to address the public's questions regarding PFAS.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff and Jessica. Very much appreciate those presentations. And I think one of the things I want to reflect on for us, I know maybe spending a lot of their time thinking about PFAS in drinking water, PFAS at contaminated sites. My role here is less as director of the drinking water program than as leading the coordination of all of our cross-agency activities. And I think starting with the perspective of TSCA and from the manufacturing perspective is important, but also want to encourage all of you throughout the discussions today and those of you who will be here tomorrow and then going forward, that we need to think very holistically about these compounds and think about how the various responsibilities and authorities we have across the agency come into play and at the state level come into play, and about thinking about how we best handle some of these challenges. It is a very complex problem, and as Jessica noted, these compounds are in tremendously wide use in commerce today, and as Jeff noted, for in many ways really good reasons in terms of their remarkable engineering properties, but there are also emerging concerns about their presence in the environment. So we're going to be thinking very holistically about this issue and encourage you to help us throughout the day to think in those terms as well. So we're going to prepare here to transition to the first working session of the summit, and our work together is going to be much more engaging for all of you in the audience as we get into this. I do want to say a couple words though before we head in that direction, and the first is that, as the administrator said this morning and has said many times, the best solutions to complex problems like this one rarely come from Washington. And it's going to be very important to have the perspectives of the states, the tribes, the NGOs, the public, and I'm going to talk about a bit more in just a minute, as we think through these issues. We invited you all here because we need to roll up our sleeves together to think about these issues, as opposed to us telling you what we plan to do. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, as I mentioned earlier, our next step after this summit is that EPA will be traveling to communities across the country. And in fact, we're going to be spending much more time with communities than we are here in this summit, talking about local challenges, and so much appreciate Commissioner Scott being here from the state of New Hampshire, Alex Dunn from Region 1. Our first stop will be in Portsmouth, New Hampshire on the 25th of June to meet with the community there to talk about some of those challenges. And we're going to be then going to Michigan later in the month of July and looking for a number of other locations across the country to visit. I expect we'll be at least 5 locations over the course of the summer. And all of this is really focused on understanding the local challenges from local communities so we can fold all that into our thinking about how we proceed on these issues. So all of these discussions today and going forward are going to be key contributors to the development of, the administrator mentioned, of our National Management Plan for PFAS compounds, which we plan to have completed before the end of the calendar year. And we do need to hear very clearly from all the stakeholders as we're working towards this. So we have set up, just so folks know, we've set up a docket, and the information on how to provide information to that docket is available on our website. So this is not the only opportunity for people to tell us what they're thinking here. We're going to be encouraging those in the room and also those who are watching via the live stream to contribute ideas via the docket. And so we are very interested in engaging all of you as much as we can as we work through these challenging issues. So I'm going to take us to a break now, and we're going to do a little transition here. But thanks again to all of you for being here. Thanks to those who have signed on to participate via the live stream, and we will be reaching out to your communities going forward. So thank you so much, everyone.